Let me call to order the September 18th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. May you take the roll, please?
Ms. Hockenberry?
Here.
Mr. Krasner? Here. Mr. Rankin?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Teets? Here. Mr. Wodiska?
Here.
And I haven't heard from Mr. Jean, but he's not here at this time.
I have not heard from him either. So we are proceeding. We have no speaker series this evening, and then moving on to item number 4, adoption of the agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt this evening's very short agenda?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Everybody's in favor of the agenda. I don't know who got in there first.
I'll step back.
So, Tim, were you you made the motion?
Tim.
And second?
Yeah.
All right.
Got it.
Great.
I was the only one who seconded it, so I win.
Let me just make sure anybody dissenting on the agenda, because, no.
Why don't you try for adjournment? We're good on that.
Do we have any petitions, Ms. G?
I have none.
Okay. Does anybody in the audience wish to speak on something not on the agenda? Nope. Okay, old business, none, new business. We have moved quickly to the sale of the Miller House on 366 North Washington Street. We have apparently some new information that we recently received, and I need to be briefed on that.
Mr. Wodiska, members of the Planning Commission,
Finally.
wanted to bring to your attention the report that Dana Lewis has provided of the Housing Office. She is here to present it. Just to bring this into focus, as you may know, and Ms. Hockenberry very aware of this, this has been a long-term project to try to make better use of a vacant piece of city property on North Washington Street, known as the Miller House. And so after a lot of effort, it is proposed to be a location for a group home, and the City Council, its last meeting, referred out this item to a number of boards and commissions. The issue before the Planning Commission tonight is whether or not to recommend approval of the land sale. City Charter requires you to take a look at that. And so that is really the question in front of the Planning Commission. Is the general location, character, and extent of the proposed land sale in compliance with the comprehensive plan? There also is a resolution attached, which is necessary and should be, if you decide that you want to move forward with this, should be adopted and entered into the minutes. So with that, I'll introduce Dana Lewis to answer more questions and to provide a broader and more detailed overview. Thank you.
Dana Lewis with the with Housing and Human Services, Housing Program Analyst, and I also have Mary Jane Panic from Community Havens here, and they are the selected developer for the group home. So just by way of background, this has been going on, like Jim said, for a long time. And in 2015, Community Residences was selected through a PPA process. I think we came to you all at that time for feedback to operate a group home for persons with disabilities on city-owned land at 366 North Washington Street. The property has been owned by the city and has been recommended to be demolished. It's in a pretty horrible site, so it's going to have to be a tear down. And it was previously used as a group home, and that is will also be the new use. It will house 5 persons with disabilities, adults. And so since Community Residences received their intent from the city that they've been selected, they also received a $300,000 grant to go towards the project from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Development Services, and that will be used for the project. So hopefully, if all goes well, a new facility will be available by 2019. That's the goal. So tonight we're here to request you all to approve by resolution that the land sale of 7,516 square feet, known as the Miller House, at 366 North Washington Street, RPC 53103-016 of the Falls Church property records, zoned T1 transitional, and find that the general location, character, and extent of the sale and the use to be made of the property is in compliance with the comprehensive plan per the requirements of Virginia Code Section 15.2, as well as the City Charter Section 17. So we need you all's approval to go forward. Council has asked us to bring it to you. And so that's what we're here to do tonight. I said Mary Jane can answer any questions about the project, how it's going to be operated, how it's going to be built, all of those type of things.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Do we have any questions?
Can I speak to it, if I might?
Please.
This goes so far back. I mean, I'm thinking 12 years or more. And particularly since the training centers in Fairfax County have been shut down, there's very, very few places for residences with this type of need, particularly anywhere close to us. It almost went through about maybe 10 years ago or so, and then that fell apart. And so this has been, as I said, a long, long time in the making. And the big thing here was that there was some concern about selling property, but in here you've got the situation here that under the contract, they can buy back the land for $1 and pay for whatever that building costs, the construction costs. And so, because you can't get financing if you lease land. And it will give first choices to people. It will only be 4 people, and plus a caretaker. And it will have to be ADA accessible and everything, but it will give first choice to city residents, and I think the list is quite long already. You know, and I know some people got their names in there way back when this looked like it was going to occur. So I am very much in favor of this. I can remember when we went over to look through the house, and it was a group home, I think, for somewhat, I think, victims of abuse and everything like that. And then we've had the other situations where some of the group homes we've had around the city, the people living in them aged out, and they were not suitable for use with anybody with any physical disabilities. So I think this is an absolute necessity, and I will be happy to make that motion when it comes forward.
I will ask you to make the motion when it comes forward. Well, let me ask, anybody else have any comments or questions? Tim?
Just
Mr.
a
Stevens.
couple of questions. Is Community Havens, is that a 501c3? It is, okay.
Yes, it is.
It is, good.
Let me try to explain this. Community residence is the service part of the organization, and is our affiliate, also a 501c3, but that's the property holder.
Right. Do you know if the intention is to build the house at a particular code level beyond the existing residential code, or is the code what you intend to build
You're
to?
asking about earth
Well,
craft or whatever that? No, we're not going to do
this-
that. But
yeah.
we are going to build a 4-bedroom group home on 2 levels with an elevator.
Yeah.
And there's, the downstairs is actually for another individual, not a caregiver, that would be more independent, someone that has either lived in a group home but is now working toward living on their own. So with supervision, but having their own total space.
There has been a lot of coordination already
Right.
in the preliminary planning of this with building safety and zoning staff. And so this will be a purpose-built building
Right.
that will be totally accessible. So
Right.
we'll have a lot of items that are standard single family in terms of safety and accessibility.
The only other thought I had was just kind of an observation, it's probably more for Mr. Snyder. It's interesting that Community Residences was not able to obtain financing unless it had title to the land, whereas at the campus site, we intend to proceed with a ground lease, hopefully to firms that will have ample opportunity to borrow money. So I guess it's just a completely different concept.
Different scales of projects,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Interesting observation, though.
Okay, that's it.
I had a
Mr.
question.
Rankin?
Just, it sounds like there's been work on the design of the home. I mean, do we know what it's going to look like? It's in a,
Attractive.
It's a,
I mean, does the city have does the city have input in that? I mean, since after we sell the property?
I mean, we do have some input,
Right,
but it's 2 stories and a basement.
it's
I
2
believe.
stories in the lower level.
Yeah.
It will meet the design code of the city, so it will blend in with that community between Church and Sunrise. So it'll look very traditional.
Do you have like conceptual renderings or?
Actually, I do.
plans?
I have them with me if you want to take a look.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know we're not here to decide the architecture, but interesting to see what's going to go there.
Yeah, the intent is to have, as Mr. Snyder said, it to be completely accessible. The first floor will be able to be rolled in, so you could roll in on a wheelchair. There'll be a living room, dining room there, 2 bedrooms, and an accessible bath with probably not a shower. I mean, no tub, but a shower. So that anybody can use it. It also, depending on the needs of the individuals, could have a track system to help in transferring individuals from their bedroom to the bathroom.
So maybe you already said this. So what is the population that you're going to serve? What's your target?
Persons
Audience.
with developmental disabilities, adults, right. There you go. All this. We are proposing to use the builder we used for our most recent new build home that's in Arlington Street, and several of the city council members were able to go visit that home earlier this year, I think, yeah.
I wanted to go. Unfortunately, had other things I had to do, but there are a lot of
Anyway,
good projects over
but
there.
if you'd like to see that home, we would be happy to set up another visit there. It's basic, but it has nice wide hallways and bathrooms with showers that can be rolled into and cabinets that can, looking to see if I have a copy of a picture. Cabinets that a wheelchair can roll right under. So it's very accessible for anyone that needs kind of counters. And,
Are you going to have signage?
pardon me?
Is there going to be any kind of signage?
No. They're a home in the neighborhood. The purpose of this is certainly in line with the DOJ settlement and the Olmstead Act to get individuals out of institutions and into their community.
Right.
So this will look like any other house on this street, except that street. It'll be between some bigger properties, but it'll look like just a regular house.
Okay.
Mr. Rankin, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Lindy said. I mean, I think this is something that obviously the region and our city lacks and could really use. I think both for the people that would live there, but also for the people that live around here. Because my daughter has special needs. She has developmental delays, and actually, she's only 9, and this is how limited these are. We've already toured around some houses in Fairfax County in the area because the wait lists are, really long. And I just know from walking around town with her, everyone knows her, everyone says hi, and it's nice and it's great. And I think that it's great for her. And we go, my father-in-law lives in Ohio, and not to say anything bad about Ohio, but you go in other places in the country, and people stare at her and they think she's weird. But I think around here, because we welcome these kinds of people and we keep them in our community, that it helps both those people and the people, regular people. So sorry. I may have a conflict on voting for this because this could be a place that my daughter actually lives down the road. But I think it's just an outstanding use of some land that we couldn't really get much use out of. And I think the people that operate these kinds of places are great. So anyway, I will definitely be voting to approve this, and it would be great to see it open in a year and a half or so. That I'll gladly go to the ribbon cutting and enjoy
We'll
it.
do all that, right.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin, for your comment. We know how tough it is to find housing for individuals. Hopefully, your daughter is on a wait list, and as she grows up and there's opportunities, that'd certainly be something to talk with you about.
Do you have anything you want to add, or no?
I think everyone covered everything I had.
Okay.
I had a question about the lease, but I understand the financing issue, although I did know, it seems like a lot of it's going to come from a grant, so.
Well, absolutely. Just so you know, this is a very expensive house to operate. And as the time has gone around, since we first started the conversation, the cost of the house and getting it built has also gone up pretty substantially. We have a budget both on our Community Haven side and on the operating side to be able to make this work, but that is largely due to mortgage, a lot of grant funding cobbled together to make it work. I did meet with VHDA last week as a possible another provider for a grant and/or loan, and I've got two other people we're going to look for grants that'll work together. Our bank has offered commitment, not a contract, but a agreement that they would support us in this project. Final pieces that get put together.
I add a little bit more about the history. When all this started, it was a huge group of people, faith-based, from the churches, all there, people from Sunrise, people from, all the community. And I just wish, as Andy was saying, we could do more community-based housing and places for people to keep our community together, because I think it's very important. And I know so many people who had children with the needs, and even this is more for the severe, I know, but if we could only have places for people with perhaps high-functioning Down syndrome or high-functioning, whatever they happen to have, particularly when we were talking around the churches, the Methodist Church wanted to have something so they could work in the garden.
Right, exactly.
Or maybe even volunteer over at Sunrise. So I wish we could come up with some other ideas for the community, and that the community would be more open-minded for this type of thing. Absolutely, I just, it's been a long time I've been involved with it.
Sorry, that's really the intent of that lower level apartment, is that somebody that's higher functioning to be able to go and potentially work at Sunrise or work with the church, and the garden is right across the yard, so that would be something that church has already offered.
And it was right on a bus route, too. It's just
route.
perfect
Yeah.
location if we could do something bigger. It was just incredible.
I think we maxed the available building side based on the zoning setbacks, so.
So I have just a few quick questions, just so I understand what we're agreeing to, though. Like all of my colleagues, I support this 100%. I just do want to understand some of the specifics. Mr. Snyder, what does the future land use map say for this space?
I believe it's shown as transitional on the land use plan. I'd have to double check it, but that's what it's presently zoned as well.
Since the existing Miller House was there, on that map, I haven't looked at this particular property, was it designated for something else? Because there was talk of raising it in the past. I just want to know
At
if
one
we're
point,
being
there was
consistent.
talk about trying to do a park there, when we were doing
That's what-
the
that
small
sounds right.
area plan for North Washington Street. And one of the ideas was we could do a park and somehow connect it to a pathway to Madison Park. The difficulty with that was that there was no real way to connect it because you had Sunrise in between. Didn't have any funding for that park. And when that plan was brought forward, the church actually was one of the stakeholders that we talked to in part of the commission's work on the North Washington Street plan. Said, gee, there's a better idea, or there's an idea we have, we'd like to work with the city to see if something of this type could be made of the Miller House, which previously had this kind of use on it. So that was really the beginning, and I understand from Ms. Hockenberry there's a longer history, but that's when, thinking more about, well, what else could be done here? So I think it's presently on the plan as transitional along with those sites. They're shown that way also. So it's consistent with land use and zoning. It's also consistent with the goals of the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan, where I was just to be candid, I was shocked when I got here to find that there were no active group homes in the city. That was shocking. So it really resonated with me that there was an effort to kind of revive that because they'd been here but been lost. So I think this is really compatible on a lot of levels with our comprehensive plan, particularly on the housing side, the need for this and more of this kind of facility.
I was going to add too that economic development did a pretty intensive, search to see if there were any business entities that might be interested in the site. And no one, they kind of cited the way it was positioned, that it wasn't a really good site for a business. The parking lot for Sunrise is directly behind it. It's just kind of an awkward piece of land. And so they didn't have any takers when they did their due diligence and asked a lot of businesses.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that we did do that due diligence, just it is taxpayer money and land. So let me ask, again, so I understand the specifics of what the deal is for Falls Church and your organization. So this, I'm reviewing what I have in front of me. I want to make sure I'm clear. The sale is for $1. We currently own the land. We're going to sell it for $1. In addition to that, the City of Falls Church has a grant currently for $300,000 from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. So that $300,000 then gets transferred over to your organization so that you can build the home or the preliminary work. Okay. $900,000. Okay, so this you're. Okay.
It depends on what the final plans, are going to end up being when we get closer to understanding. That's the number we're working with.
Okay. Then there is, and this is the part where I'm starting to get a little confused. It appears there's some forgiveness of the assessed value of $460,000. That this land, I mean, we don't have any takers on it, but it says the appraised value of this is $460,000 of the land. So are we then just donating that money? Are there going to be taxes then paid on the land once the house is built like any other property, or that's being forgiven in this process? Again, I'm just trying to understand it, it's not a support question.
Sure. The land is being sold to us for $1.
Right.
There's a clawback clause in that sale agreement that if we don't provide the services, that the city can get it back for that $1 and the cost of the house less the grant money.
That's the grant, right. And there's some $50,000 formula that gets kind of complicated here.
Yeah, I
that
don't-
Per year of usage.
$50,000, I don't quite understand it, but I think the intent originally was for kind of a reimbursement for the cost of what taxes would be. But in this property, I have to tell you that we are going to request a tax exemption for the property as part of the partnership between residents, Community Haven. That money that we would, I mean, it's, number one, it's property that you've not received taxes on because it's yours. 73, I think. And that money that we would have otherwise had to put aside for taxes would instead be used for reserves for the house to keep it in good condition and/or operational expense. Just, it's a balance of money that we would hope to not have to spend on tax. Put it to better use toward the home and the residents at that home.
Yeah, look, there's, to me, no question that this is money well spent. I am trying to understand what Falls Church's financial piece of it. So I think we're forgiving $460,000, though I'm not sure in terms of this sale. Like, we could sell it for $460,000. That's what this document says is appraised. You're saying there's no takers. I get it. And then my understanding from what you're talking about is it hasn't been decided yet, but there's discussions that you will not have to pay taxes on it. Again, I support that, but I just want to understand it. That instead of or you're paying taxes on $1, or you're paying tax on I mean, because if you're paying taxes on $950,000 or whatever the value of the house is, that would be a struggle, it sounds like. And so it seems like by supporting this, that the City of Falls Church is really doing a lot to be a good partner with your organization and to support these individuals. So
We absolutely agree, and I think this is a good example of city versus private partnership to do the best we can for the city that needs support. Now, we will not pick the individuals who will live. Falls Church, Fairfax Falls Church, CSB will initiate applications for individuals. We'll work with them, and then together as a final group decision, we'll decide who actually gets there. But applications are initiated.
So it sounds like that while you can't guarantee it by any stretch because people's needs are what they are, that preference would be given to current residents of the City of Falls
That's true.
Church?
And I think when we looked at this a couple of years ago, even more, there were 11 individuals who's the City of Falls Church.
Okay.
I'm guessing all of this is a way to establish a value so the bank is made whole. So that I think the idea is if they get a loan, they build the house, they can't operate it, either the city can buy it back but pay enough money to pay off the mortgage or whatever, or they could sell it to somebody else for enough money. So I'm guessing all of this value and clawback is just to keep the bank happy. So the city is taking on some risk because we could end up with a building that we don't need and pay for, but it seems like
But you'll be rid of a house that's
yeah, exactly. Seems like a reasonable risk and probably low risk, but I'm guessing that's all that set up for that.
Yeah, well, I think this is a really wonderful program. Mr. Rankin's heartfelt comments here and the history that's gone into this, and we've discussed it my entire time on the commission. So I'm a strong supporter of it as well. I also am commending City of Falls Church for making these sort of concessions so that this can happen and we can support these individuals. So that's it for my questions. Anyone want to make any other comments, or we're ready to move? All right, Mrs. Hockenberry, you have the honor then.
Thank you so much. I've been waiting a long time to do this, right? I move to grant first reading for T017-14, or refer to, why refer to the Planning Commission? We're here.
Actually, let me, can I refer you to the more recent document, Ms. Hockenberry? It's, just came to you on the dais. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Because
I didn't look at my incoming mail.
We did some work today.
I'm saying that doesn't
this-
make any
this-
sense.
This came, so this
Good,
is
thank
the,
you.
their proposed motion is there in bold, and then there is the, at the end, there is also the resolution for the commission to adopt on page 5 and 6.
Okay, thank you for pointing me in the
Now, I
right direction.
apologize for, we did a lot of good work this afternoon, but it did come to you late, so.
Okay, the Planning Commission moves to find the general location and character extent of the Miller House land sale and use is in compliance with the comprehensive plan per the requirements of Virginia Code Section 152-2232, as well as the City Charter Section 17.07. And request that we include the,
And adopt.
on page 5, that we include the resolution. Do you want me to read the resolution?
I do not think that's necessary unless, Ms. G, you tell us otherwise.
It'd be, I am mentioning the resolution and finding the sale to Community Havens, Inc.
Well, this will be
180.
included in the,
I know.
in the minutes of the commission.
I'll second the motion.
Got it,
Any comments on the motion?
got it.
All right, then, Ms. G, can you take a roll call vote, please?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Wodisca?
Yes.
John is absent.
Unanimous approval. Thank you very much for all your good work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah?
You want your drawings back?
It's here, it's right there, you can take it. Okay.
And once again, if anyone is interested in looking at our most recent house, I'd be happy to set up another walkthrough. Quality of the house, that's the same builder that will be.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your offer. Okay, other business, none. Approval of minutes from the September 5th meeting. Do we have any comments?
Yeah, I have some changes, and I know it's because you were trying to condense down a long conversation. But on line 193, it really probably should read more that Ms. Teets expressed her opinion that currently there is no formal policy for errors in the city. Not that there should be no policy, but that we currently don't have a formal policy. And then and I can give you these edits later too. And then on line 195, I think what was really said is that it would be more like Ms. Teets said, the property owners had received information from Arlington County and Fairfax County that both localities have an error policy based on code. That part where I was just mentioning that they had contacted both and was able to get, although Arlington County's policy, there is no error. So it's like a no policy rule.
And while we're at it, I did, on the same line, right around 195 there, I think I did say that it was a civil matter. I don't think I said that forgiveness should be given. I don't think I said that. I think I said that it was a civil matter. There should be a policy for granting errors. I mean, I don't remember what it said, but I don't recall saying that, making a judgment that, in this case, since I don't know the facts of the case as far as who's right and who's wrong, but just that it was a matter between two parties is a civil matter.
Any other comments? Mr. Stevens?
I have several changes. Ms. G, I've got them printed up for you. I'll go ahead and read them just for my colleagues. Okay, line 72 should read that Mr. Stevens asked where deliveries take place today. Line 117 should read, Mr. Stevens asked if the bike share subscriptions provided to employees could be used for commuting. And then it goes on, Ms. Mesta replied that they could. Line 121 should read, Mr. Stevens requested that the electrical system be able to accommodate 2 EV charging stations located at the front of City Hall in case grant funding can be obtained. Lines 148 and 149 should state that Mr. Dijon was absent, not Mr. Stevens. And line 162 should read, Mr. Stevens noted the importance of being able to participate in meetings electronically. That's it.
That was comprehensive. I can confirm that on line 127, I opened the meeting to the public. So you're good on that one. Anything else? If not, would someone make a motion to accept the minutes with the numerous modifications?
I move that we accept the amendments with the noted amendments.
And I'll second it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Abstentions? Everybody was present except for the same person. Okay. Do we have Planning Commission reports? And I was unable to attend the Economic Working Group this Friday.
I was
so
there, so I got you.
You can
These two are here
give
too.
me a
so.
backup cover. I'd love to hear about it.
Basically, we went through essentially like the laundry list of things that have to happen in some high-level timeline should the referendum pass. Should the referendum not pass, I think it all goes out the window, but.
We still don't know what happened.
Specifically on the entitlements.
Yeah, so-
We're all there, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we talked about the entitlements and, you know, the RFP, RFQ process. I don't know, it was all nothing particularly groundbreaking. And some of the entitlement stuff I think we'll talk about in the work session with the area plan, because there was some discussion about when to rezone, but
That was really important.
talk about that later. But, I mean, it wasn't.
That was the key issue in my mind too, the whether we zone B2 or
Rezoning
not.
and how to do it and to what level.
But I assume we'll talk about that with the area plan. It seemed to be part of the.
It was fairly productive, however, for going through all the steps.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you realize, and the city manager pointed out several times, that it's, you know, it's a lot of stuff to do in a tight time. So I do think that it makes sense to be preparing for it as if the referendum passes. And if it doesn't, I think everyone's going to take a vacation and I don't know. But I think in order to meet any of these milestones, we have to be working on it straight through.
And I think that needs to be clarified with the public as to what happens if there's a no vote. And I don't think it's been fully qualified
Yeah, I know. I
and
think
spelled out, that we would still need to go for
the
another
superintendent has a
referendum.
plan B, but it's not pretty. So.
No matter what, you'd need to go to another referendum for any kind of big money.
So, Mr. Snyder, I have a couple quick questions related to that. The first is, are we going to talk about that B2 zoning at the work session in a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay, all right, then I won't.
Actually, that's, land use and zoning is, I think, one of the main things we need to talk about. Part of the commission's, it's something you have to be involved in.
Absolutely.
It's pretty central to.
All right, so let's skip that for right now. I have heard, and maybe this is probably a question for the city attorney, but that the school board and the city council are, for legal reasons, unwilling to take a position on supporting this referendum, which makes sense from, again, legal reason.
And I think city staff as well.
City staff. Is the planning commission able to take a position on the economic development piece of it, not the school, but just to say, I mean, I don't know that we have consensus, but are we able to, on this small piece, say we could take a formal position on just that we're pro-economic development and that it does relate to that site, or is this just, we just need to be quiet?
Well,
I mean, as an organization.
I think we've been talking about, ever since the boundary adjustment was done and the arrangement with Fairfax County was made, commercial purposes with the balance being used. So as a part of thinking about that, it's certainly, I think, okay to talk about it should the referendum get approved. And can't see any formal action being taken on that. Happen in advance of the referendum where the voters decide whether or not to support dollars to create. So I think talking about it from a planning point of view, referendum is essentially up to the city, and all abide by,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest that you get a read from the city attorney and let us know by email? Quite
Yeah, I mean,
stringent.
I wouldn't see you taking any formal position
No, but
in
even,
advance of-
even the members of council are not allowed to take any position whatsoever. And so I do.
take position.
Individually, they can't?
Well, they're not supposed, Letty explained it to me.
Right.
At the tailgate a couple weeks ago, that they've been told they're really not supposed to be pro or against the referendum. They can informationally talk about it, so she can answer questions if you had to ask her questions, but she could only talk about it on an informational basis, what she explained. And Mary Beth Connolly also said the same thing, so.
Well, and as individuals, they still have their First Amendment rights. So.
Right.
They do, but I mean, I guess they're trying to be really strict about it and not do anything that's squishy. And so, but if you ask them, that's what they say.
So we're,
I'm even wondering whether to put a sign in my yard.
Well, I'm not wondering.
You're a rebel.
I don't really want to wonder.
Mr. Rankin, let's note that Mr. Rankin is a rebel. When we
I
decided we
can't
were not going
control
to.
what my wife puts in our yard, that's all.
There you go.
Okay, I can blame it on Ed.
Well, I do think it's interesting, on Sunday, they did have the Oxford debate format on the referendum. That was the League of Women Voters and VPAS event. And that question did come up about if they don't say yes, what do you do? And, and basically what came out, we come up with a new plan and do another referendum, because there is no plan that doesn't involve a referendum, because there is no amount of money that will fix our issues. Even if you cut it in half, it's still a referendum. So, and I know Mr. Stevens and Mrs. Hockenberry was also there, and it was actually a good event in that prior to the debate, people filled out ballot cards and said if they were for, against, or not sure. And then they did it at the end of the debate, and the only thing that moved was the yes. Actually, yes got a little bit bigger. So, and I think it went from 62% to 64%, which is statistically not that much movement, but it was the only one that moved.
There were about 100 people there.
Yeah,
So it
I
kind
know.
of comes out
two people.
good.
yeah,
for
basically.
percentages.
So, based on what, this is not a legal opinion, but based on what you're hearing, that we should individually not speak up on this thing? That sounds
No.
so.
I think if you're going to speak up, you probably need to say that personally, this
Yeah.
is how
Well,
I
you have
feel.
to-
I have seen
Right, you're not
city
speaking on behalf of the
councilors,
commission,
yes.
but you
Yeah,
could,
right.
as
Personally,
an
I
individual,
feel
you're allowed
this
to
way.
say whatever you
Speaking
want.
as
That's
an
what I've seen, yeah.
Yeah.
individual,
Don't imply you are
As a
speaking for the
citizen.
planning commission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I mean,
But
that makes
as far as I'm
sense.
concerned, you
That's-
all been speaking.
I don't think that we're under the same strictness that the city council or the school board is, because we're not in a budgetary situation for this project exactly. But I think it's always best to say personally anyway.
Yeah.
And just inadvertently, just a quick observation, you mentioned 3 of you were at the Economic Development Committee, and Russ was supposed to be there. If Russ had shown up, that could have been an inadvertent quorum.
No, there is a quorum. Well, it's a
Well, I'm a
meeting, though,
member.
but there's more than two.
Oh, is it advertised? for the
It-
planning
it's a-
commission?
advertised
it's a
public
public
Yeah.
meeting.
But is it advertised as a planning committee? I don't know, I know sometimes we've
It's
talked
advertised,
about
yeah.
inadvertent meetings on email, but what about inadvertent when we're together in person?
It is. If it's
think
more
that
than
was an
two people,
advertent
it's technically a
I think
meeting.
it's,
So-
I think it's typically as a gathering of public officials, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's published, I mean,
And it is published.
Nick comes sometimes, so.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's okay.
You should come, 7:30 Fridays. It's awesome.
If you go on the city site, you can give yourself alerts for these meetings, and they email you every time they happen.
Endless emails.
I figured you guys got it covered, so.
I don't know, 4 people, it's tight. Okay, any other
people
planning
have to
commission
work.
reports?
Did anybody go to the EDA meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Anything interesting?
Oh, well, we talked about the Pocket
Oh.
Park.
Yeah.
Mark, we'll hear about that.
And then they got into a big discussion whether or not they
Same
were
issue.
going to support
Same
the
issue.
group.
Which group did?
EDA.
Oh, okay.
So they asked for clarification as to whether, as an organization, they could take a position.
Whether they should make a
What was the answer?
statement.
They didn't know, they
They're
just put it out
finding
as a
out.
question that they would like to get an answer on.
Yeah, they probably should stick to the economic development part, make it easier for them.
Chair, I might have just one other thing. This doesn't directly come under planning. However, I would like to be public with the fact that I think the city has got to do a lot better with notifying people with what's going on in their area. The gas company has been working over on Seton Lane now for a month and a half. Finally, at September 8th, somebody came around from the gas company to tell us what we were going to do, and told us today they were going to turn off our gas in the house and turn it back on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they still have all of Seton Lane to do, and it has been a huge inconvenience. Now, they have repaved the first block down there from the Marshall on up towards me, but like today, they dug up my whole driveway without permission and put a line in, and they said, well, you weren't here. I said, yeah, I went out to lunch. Hour and 45 minutes, and had a big front loader. I've got pictures. But I do think we need to do much better at communicating with, the public on any of these kinds of things. And that's going on all over the city right now with a lot of repaving, a lot of doing, and, the digging 6-foot holes. And it's quite something.
Yeah, I think if it's like just a day event where they have to repave them, but if they're going to be on your street for multiple days and digging
Oh,
up.
this has gone on
But I will
all
say,
of August.
sometimes it's the vendor. And for example, Verizon Fios came into Independence Square, which I own a property in there, and they just started digging up stuff. And so the condo board came out and was like, why are you digging up everything? And they were like, oh, we're putting new Fios line in. And this is, and the condo board's like, this is private property. I said, well, the city gave us permission. And we're like, well, someone should have sent a letter
Right.
to the landowners first to say we were going to dig up your, and they did patch things, but they didn't, it's a difference between digging a hole and patching pavement than replacing pavement.
They probably have an easement. I mean, the utility companies do have a right to go in and, for that express purpose,
I think they
And,
probably did have.
Right, but when they
do
come
these
up
things. But they
all the
should let
way
you
to
know.
the house to dig a trench.
They probably did have an easement. I think the thing that was interesting is the people
Not
that
that
were
we had
doing the
gravel.
digging had no idea if they had an easement or anything.
Yeah.
They just said the city gave permission. I'm pretty sure the city had no idea if they were doing it. So, I don't know. It's, but we do have agreements with all these people, and I'm sure in our agreements say that they're supposed to notify property owners. This,
I'm happy to convey some of this to
Public
Public
Works.
Works Department. I mean, there is
Cherry picking.
a lot of utility work going on, upgrading of old facilities. Pass on those concerns.
I have a random question. What are the tall poles that seem to be strapped to some of the streetlights?
I understand from Mr.
C2.
Whitfield, this is part of a consultant's effort to kind of track traffic, and they're doing long-term project or projects, some like looking at signal timing.
Okay. That was
So
my
they're
guess.
gathering data.
That was my guess.
While we're complaining about utility companies and,
Remember the Russians installing?
there's a lot of old telephone poles that need to be removed that I think they're waiting on, like, other contractors, like the Dominions moved their stuff months and months and months ago on Lincoln. And like probably Cox and Verizon, I don't know if it's Verizon, but Cox and others have not. And so now you have, like, it's bad enough how the poles are in the middle of the sidewalk in lots of parts of our city. But when you have 2 poles,
been exciting.
that's just that much worse, so. They got to move their stuff from their old pole to the new pole, and then the old pole can be removed. But it's been like probably close to 8 months. And now you have the new pole in. It was already in the middle of the sidewalk with the old pole next to it. And so it's really, there's no room for, I mean, you can't push a stroller, a wheelchair, anything around those things. It's already a substandard, as Mr. Snyder knows very well, in that area of town. So,
You could send us a photograph. I'd be happy to convey this. I've seen some of that too. You get
yeah,
poles next to one another, extra
Yeah.
poles, and
Yeah, all along Lincoln, where they replaced poles over the last year, yeah.
You have photographs, I'll be
Sure.
able to pass those along.
Sure, while we're complaining about utilities,
Photographs are very helpful to
Yeah.
show the explicit.
figure out, just pile on there.
Any other utility company complaints?
My gas bill last month was,
Personal bills that you are complaining.
That's so funny.
As I said, it's not planning, but there's infrastructure.
All right.
I will say that I understand that they are going to be beginning very soon the utility undergrounding work on South Washington Street, part of this long process to improve the streetscape. So that's a really important project that should result in new trees, lights, brick paving, a very attractive new streetscape, but we have to get rid of the old poles and wires, and that will require trenching and a lot of work before those old poles and wires disappear. But there's a major investment for the city. It could really help that part of town continue to improve.
Will that be more than just the electric lines? Because that's one of the problems we've had with the undergrounding, is all they put underground is the Dominion lines, and they've left up the,
I believe this is to get rid of all the overhead lines, I believe.
that would be
It
good.
goes up to, I believe, the cab company.
And then,
Lines.
Commissioners, you guys saw the email I had Ms. G forward to you about the panels, that there's a survey right now on the panels, and I thought it was kind of cool to see what we're looking at for those.
And I believe you can see full-size replicas at the Kensington in the Falls Church Arts, so
Right.
you haven't,
That was in the.
many of
the
you have
note.
been to that facility, but it's a great place to see what they might look like. in
Well, there's some
full-size.
downstairs.
Uh,
Hallway.
All right, next item of business.
Oh, I
Miss-
have two questions.
Okay.
I never,
Uh,
sorry. No, one, just on October 2nd, right now, we're canceled. I would love to see us use that time to pick up some things that we've had on our list forever. The future land use map amendment for greenways and paper streets, and maybe the Greenway Downs overlay that we've kind of let go for a while.
Let me,
Is there's
you
actually
mentioned,
something
I
there
just want to
now?
make sure, at one point, we had the Nova Parks people coming on the 2nd. So that's now been changed
Yeah.
to the 16th? Okay.
Yeah, so right now, we're empty on October 2nd. It would be lovely to pick up some of these items that we've kind of been rotating through for years trying to get done. I especially think fixing the future land use map for the greenways and paper streets is really something we should get done easily and should think about doing.
Yeah, I never understood why it wasn't
Or
done.
it gets moldy.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is, I know that Broad and Washington and the Founder's Row are kind of languishing right now because they're going through neighborhood meetings and things like that. But, I mean, another thing I'd love to see on October 2nd would be just a quick briefing from staff, like what iteration are we on? What's been changing in these neighborhood meetings? I personally, I don't know about you guys, but I never got notice of any of these meetings. I assume they're just neighbor meetings, so.
I don't think Founder's Row's meeting with anybody. I don't think Founder's Row's been doing anything.
Well, I know they're not, but they're working with staff, I thought.
Maybe, I don't know if they're even doing that.
Well, I guess Mr. Snyder can tell us. Is there, I mean,
That was the next item on the agenda. No.
There have
I
been
know.
there have been some meetings with neighbors in their homes, working particularly on the Broad and Washington, and I believe there are some design ideas to rearrange massing that helpful to the community, are evolving from that. So I think hopefully that will be a positive move forward. The detailed plans have not been drawn up. I will mention there is, I believe, scheduled for the 16th of October, a walking tour that City Council wants to do, starting early and looking at Tinner Hill, 301 West Broad, I believe, and Broad and Washington, maybe ending at Broad and Washington. So we will keep you posted. Commissioners are invited to attend. It's got to happen early. And
like
Gonna
6
get
PM
dark.
maybe? Like around 6 PM or
well,
5:30?
I'm
16th.
guessing 6 or 6:30.
Yeah.
It's a lot of ground to cover. I mean, even though it's a small city, it's a lot of places to go. So
Okay.
so I'll keep you posted on that, but that was being talked about this morning. City Council's been wanting to do some of that. So looking again at the Tinner Hill project, doing a walk around, I think 301 West Broad, and then ending at Broad and Washington. So you all would be invited, if it works for members, you're certainly invited to attend, not mandatory, and we would go ahead and have our meeting on the 16th.
Well, I'm personally willing to come on the 2nd for, these two items. What about, I don't know where it stands with staff in terms of, what does it take to dust off the Greenway Downs and Paper Streets? I mean, it's 2 weeks away. I thought it was essentially done, but I don't
what I
want to,
thought
I don't
as
want to
well.
commit to you
We
guys.
can, we certainly have the material, we can bring it back to you to refresh.
Right. Well, that's what I think Greenway
There was
Downs.
a lot of good work done.
Right, we had completed our side of it. I just feel like we had completed our side of it, but I think before we would send it to council, we need to look at it again and see if it needs any refreshing.
But there's no action that would.
But there's
we would
nothing
be able
new to
take?
talk about. I don't know.
Well, I guess the next,
I
we
agree.
were
I thought if we.
I do believe, though, at least a couple of commission members
have not seen it.
that had not seen it. Maybe you had. You might have seen it on the BZA.
I mean, I'm familiar with both of those projects. I guess, I don't want people to come out just so I can get an overview. I'm happy to meet with Jim privately, but the point is, like, if there's something new to talk about, then let's come out
Well, I
and
guess
talk
what
about it. If it's just a rehashing
I
of
agree.
something that happened 2-3 years ago and nothing's changed, I don't know, it's up to you guys, but
Well,
I don't know if
the
there's a lot of
issue
utility
is-
in that.
No, I agree.
The issue here is that we have talked about these issues. With Greenway Downs, we actually got to the point where we actually had a motion and everything, but we can't move forward with it until we get it to council. And I think on the Paper Streets, we actually never had a formal anything. We didn't finish that part. We just talked about it.
So is there a way to move this forward? I mean, so as opposed, I agree with Mr. Krasner. If it's just a rehash, I don't need to
Well,
Well,
do that.
perhaps
but-
it's something the chairman can talk about with city council or the mayor in terms of how's this fit in with, this is something commission has said they'd like to get done, work's been done, but what kind of a timetable, given everything else that's going
Right.
on, works for council and for,
I just, I guess I was thinking it, since it's sat for a while, we might need to review it.
we certainly can look and find the materials and send them back out to people or get you.
And maybe I'm incorrect, but in the future land use, we actually do have to do some type of motion to move it
Yeah,
forward.
I mean,
don't
we've
we?
got these little blank white spots that don't
Right.
recognize that there's really going to be green space there. It's public space, that greenways, I think is we were calling them.
Exactly. But I mean, I'm just
It
saying,
was a very simple concept of, we're going to recognize it as public space, it's not going to be a street, but we're not losing the property. It's going to stay as public space.
yeah, but I guess what I was saying is that I think we actually do have to do a formal motion to have it go to council, don't we?
Yeah, you'd need to amend the future land use map and add the green. It was done in a few places before I got here, I think for Cedar
Yeah.
Place and
Right.
a couple of other places.
All right.
It's a good idea.
At this point, we have no meeting on the 2nd, but I will talk to Mr. Schneider and maybe reach out to the city council and see if we can utilize the time productively. So I will let everybody know if we are
And I
meeting on the
will-
2nd, but I need to get some information.
I'll double check these things too. Some of these are in flux, but this walking tour thing came up last week, and I think it's going to happen on the 16th. so.
Okay.
Next item, Mr. Schneider, do you have anything you'd like to talk to us about?
Well, I did want to mention that we had a very good staff tour, I guess it was last month, up in Frederick, Maryland. And we got a look at the Carroll Creek area. Folks from the Downtown Partnership and planning staff gave us a tour. It's a really remarkable place. This is a flood problem that was solved through engineering, and the city of Frederick has turned it into a beautiful waterway with a wonderful parking garages, public libraries, green space, trails. It's definitely worth going to see if you get a chance to go up there. And it was one of the ideas we had for the Jefferson Street area, that it could be transformed from this kind of industrial area with a lot of paving and buildings hanging over the creek, that could be redeveloped in a more positive way. So actually seeing it in action and talking to this staff there was very good and inspirational. Also, you may have noticed in the paper last week, there was some very good information about restaurants coming into the city. So just wanted to let you know, been a lot of work with economic development and with building safety to expedite plans and try to help fill in vacant spaces in a expedited manner. And
That was,
results have been a result of that.
that article is very
cooperation.
complimentary to planning staff and the economic
So I want
development.
to particularly let you know about building safety, who really make an extra effort to work with these business people to figure out how do you get a distillery or coffee milling machine to work in an old building and have it be safe. So they've done a really good job in working with Becky and the property owners. I think that's one of the reasons for success. So very nice to see that recognition in the paper.
Amazing, I know.
Did ruffle some feathers in Fairfax County, I will say, that article. It did, if you read the article.
We
it was,
didn't write that article. It just showed up. So.
But anyhow, no, that's a different matter.
And I do think you all did work on the project, of course, down here on Park Avenue, the former Cloverdale House, which is being renovated and brought up to standard, and it's going to be Northside Social. You may have noticed siding going on. The original 18th century siding has been scraped and reclaimed and is in place underneath the porches on the building. So there's new wood cedar siding on the original building, but they've actually reclaimed and reusing the original siding underneath, where it's protected, underneath the porches. There's a lot of original material in the building, of course, with new material and fire safety and everything, but there are lots of old beams and lots of old boards, that are still there. It's a pretty remarkable project. So that should be open, we think, in November, but, it's taken a long time because it's very complicated. There's a lot of fire safety and fire pumps and complicated to do something like that. So I think when it's all done, it's going to be very, very good. But work of the commission and the historic group and help make that happen along with the contractor. I think it's going to be a notable project in the future.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll move to our work session. All right. Meeting's adjourned. Let's bring us up to date on the downtown plaza.
Well, I was here in May, and I gave you just a kind of preview of the project. And now I'm back as part of the site plan approval process. Submitted the plan I submitted the site plan in July, got comments end of August. We've been addressing all the comments. There weren't any staff comments that substantively changed the project, so I'll go through some of the changes that came out of staff comments. But my goal here tonight is to hear what your comments are and if I need to change anything before I go back in for second submission. I'd like to go back in for second submission within the next month, couple weeks, and hopefully the next time I see you will be for approval, site plan approval. So I can go to construction first quarter of 2018.
Next time you'll be in front of us is for approval. When do you think that is?
November?
November,
Something
okay.
November?
All right. I'm going to turn down these lights, though I don't believe this gets shown on the television.
Just to remind everybody, the project site is in the 100 block of West Broad Street. It's the entire city parcel is outlined in red, but we're only going to be using the south half of the site where the parking and the landscaping are. Essentially, the park will stop at the edge of the Unity Club building. Remember, the site had a lot of interesting constraints. We have the switchgear. Of the site, we have the privately owned alleyway along the west, and then the Unity Club entrance to the east. The area is Zone B2, and public uses are by right in that zone, and it is also part of the core entertainment area within the downtown planning opportunity area. The goal of the project is to change the site from a dark, little-used space into more of a vibrant, active plaza. Hopefully bring people downtown, give them a reason to come and interact and with each other, and hopefully spend some time and spend their money at the local businesses. And then, the idea was that this would be a flexible design one that could accommodate people of all ages, different types of activities. So that was one of the main goals, was flexibility. Just to give a brief background on the project, it's not a new project, right? In 2014, the EDA identified this parcel as an underutilized portion of land. They had Olin Landscape Architecture come up with some ideas to see if it was worth pursuing. In 2015, Olin completed their conceptual designs, and the EDA decided this was a project they wanted to fund for additional design and construction. And they granted $550,000 to the city for design and construction of this project, and council voted to approve that as part of the city's capital improvement program. And then the project we started with design end of last year. I think I mentioned last time I was here, before we even started the design, we did do a survey, online survey, about over 500 respondents. And the main features that people wanted to see in the plaza were really evening lighting. About 76% of the respondents said they wanted interesting evening lighting, interactive water feature, and some benches. And the reason that people would come to the plaza would be to see and hear performances, just generally eat and attend programs and activities. So based on the constraints of the site, the goals of the EDA, and the survey results, we hired Gauthier Alvarado, which is an architecture firm, and they came up with a design. And it's not going to look much different than when you first saw it back in May. So the thought was to kind of orient this square right here is the electrical switchgear. So we're kind of trying to orient everything away from that switchgear. So we want the focus to be on either there's a stage area here on the east side of the site, and a potential water feature in the center, and a chalk wall along the east side of the site adjacent to the Unity Club entrance. So everything is kind of focused away from that switchgear.
Can I interrupt for just a second? So I'm a little confused based on looking at the drawings.
Okay.
Whether we're going with fountain or without a fountain.
Well, it's an ad alternate, okay, as part, because it's not part of the EDA budget. So they asked me to design a fountain, and when the bids come in, they would decide if they had enough money to provide additional funding for this fountain. So
Okay,
the
so
base
the-
plan is without it.
All right, so the drawings themselves looked like they had no fountain, and the renderings looked like they did have a fountain.
Well, I have a rendering without the fountain and with the fountain to show you.
View 2B versus 2A, got it. So there's, not only is, I missed the little city in the middle
So yeah,
of
so
that
if we
one.
don't do the fountain, the thought was to etch the Little City logo in the center, just to give the center some interest. And it would be etched, and then the stones, the paving pattern would kind of be offset from the rest of the other paving in order to make that logo
So
stand
I
out.
felt like I saw on the plans that it would have a circle around it. It doesn't matter, I know that this is in flux, but, so that circle in the, just on the blueprints, that,
It's probably, the thought was to create you could etch a circle around it, and with the pavers within that circle would be kind of offset. The paving pattern would be offset to make that kind of circular area where the Little City logo is etched to stand out. But it's not going to be a different material.
right, okay. So the only, I apologize for just interrupting your presentation like
That's
this.
fine.
The only ad alternate is the fountain, but,
And the fireplace.
I'm sorry, the what?
The fire pit, the fire.
Fire pit.
Well, it's not a pit, it's a fireplace. It's like a glass encased fire. It's not an open flame, we couldn't do that. But like, I don't know if you've been to Earl's in Tyson's Corner, they have a bunch of fire boxes. It's like fire in a glass box. You can't hurt yourself, but it provides atmosphere.
Okay, I did not realize that was part of this
My kid
proposal.
could figure out a way to hurt himself.
They probably could, but they also keep you
Climb one.
warm when you ice skate there.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Whoever
Got
can
it.
ice skate.
So the renderings and the drawings are still in flux as it relates to this until we get bids?
Correct, those are ad alternates, and I included the fountain in the site plan, and I guess I was thinking then I wouldn't have to do a site plan amendment if we added the fountain.
Okay.
That was the rationale behind showing the fountain in the site plan.
Okay. No, I know how ad alternates work, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of what we're doing.
Yeah, the EDA is not going to decide until they know how much it's going to cost them, exactly.
Got it. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's good. Well, we can, let me get there's two entrances to the park. The first entrance is off of Broad Street, and the As you enter into the park, we're going to use the same plaza, or the same pavers that are on the streetscape to kind of designate this as a public space, kind of draw people in. And then to on the east, we have a stage, but again, we want this plaza to be flexible, so the stage is only about 1 foot high, and it can only accommodate probably like a 4-piece band, something small. So the thought was that when there's not performances, people would still sit down and hang out up there, so it's not wasted space when we don't have a performance. The circular shape of the plaza is defined by these raised planter beds, and those are defined by seat walls that are about 2.5 to 3 feet tall with a capstone on the top, so that we have seating all around the planters themselves, so it provides for additional seating if there is a large function there. Appearing on me, I'm sorry. And the same goes for the planter walls along this side. And here's the fire in a box type thing, and there'll be a planter wall around this entire piece. And if we decide not to use that, it's just additional space for people to sit along the planter wall. The second entrance is from the north, from the parking, and we have a planter along the parking spaces to separate the parking space from the plaza area. And then along the east side of the site, we've created kind of a green wall, chalk wall to separate the commercial building entrance from the plaza. And one of the changes that have come out of the site plan review process it's no longer going to be a green wall, because there's maintenance concerns, ongoing maintenance concerns with that, and can the city afford to keep up a green wall, and we don't want to invest a lot of money in something that could potentially die. So we're going to, and it's turned out to be more expensive than we anticipated originally. So it's going to be more of a timber wall, horizontal timbers, maybe weathered wood or engineered wood, something that doesn't need a lot of maintenance and it can't be wrecked easily. Other features. Let's see, we have planters along the side that separate the dogwood parking from the plaza entrance, and then we have a walkway area up the side of the west side of the plaza along the alleyway. Should Mr. Oshinsky decide to redevelop his property and put seating out there, then there'd still be a public space between any sort of outdoor seating and the plaza. We are still, in the site plan, I have not shown this alleyway as cut off or paved because we haven't come to an agreement on an easement yet. We are working on easement language. I think when I was here last time, I mentioned that we were doing a test where we cut off access to the alleyway, and we met with them in early June right after that test, and they said there was no impact, the business owners said there was no impact to their business, and Mr. Oshinsky didn't have any problem with shutting down that alleyway to traffic. It's just been a matter of coming to agreement on easement language and payment of the pavers and such. So we're close, but I haven't shown it in the site plan because hasn't been signed. But my hope is that I could include it in the second submission.
So if that becomes set up to match the design in the park, is there another entrance that's proposed? It's just dark, right across from the fountain. I can't tell.
Right here. There's an entrance here.
All right, so the paver, it would be accessible.
Yes.
You're not hopping over plants to get there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We
All right.
have provided a pathway.
It's just hard to see from here, I'm sorry.
Yes. And the rest, I'll take you through the renderings. This is just a bird's eye view looking from Broad Street into the park.
Looks like these tables are movable?
Yes, they will be movable tables and chairs. The thought was to have it be flexible. If there's a performance, we could move them out of the way, or people can arrange them however they want to, have a larger group. Hopefully they won't disappear on us, but the thought was to keep it flexible. And we have a sign up at the front, and the city plaza here is just a placeholder. We don't have a name yet for the park, but the thought, this is a concrete wall about 8 feet long and 4 feet high that we could attach a sign to once the name of the park is decided, and we can come up with the signage design. And again, this green wall will be a timber wall. There's the fire in a box in the back there. This is with the fountain, if we can get the additional funds. And this is a view looking from the north entrance into the park, looking at the chalk wall and the switch gear. I know this is hard to see, but I just wanted to point out some of the minor changes that are different between this site plan and what you have. We were asked, originally we had Little City bike racks, 3 of them lined up end to end here. They didn't meet the spacing requirements for bike racks, so we had to shift the parking over, and we got rid of one of the bike racks, so now we just have 2. So that's really the only design change from staff comments. And then the timber wall. This is just to show the difference between the 2 designs. Here's the timber wall versus what was originally planned with the green wall. So the intent is still the same. It's still the same function, still the same idea. And what I didn't have last time when I came here was the lighting plan. As I mentioned, 75% of the people that responded were interested in evening lighting. So what we have planned to do is, these lines are raised lighting, like the festoon lighting with the little globes that hang down about 11 feet tall. So all the light would be shining down rather than up. And it would just create a nice atmosphere in the park. I mean, who doesn't like the little globe lights hanging from a restaurant? So they're crisscrossing the site, as you can see from these lines. And we have 3 poles along the center line of the plaza, 1, 2, and 3. We have 2 in the back, and then on the east side, the lights will be attached to the green wall, or to the timber wall. And then we also have lighting around the edge of the seat wall to define that circle in the evening. When I was here last, I think there was some concern about the access in the parking area behind the site. So what I did is I'm showing the new versus the the existing condition versus the proposed condition. In the existing condition, we have that circular parking area, and then we have the dogwood parking. There's not a real defined path. It's kind of a free-for-all as you drive from across the block. With our new design, we've essentially cut this median back to where the edge of the Unity Club building is, and then our parking space along the plaza will line up with the parking space under that awning where you can enter Hot and Juicy from the back. And then we've added 2 spaces to the north that line up with the existing spaces on the eastern property. So as you come down, you'll have a more defined, it's not showing up very well, a more defined pathway as you move across the block, because we're trying to line up the parking spaces with each other rather than having them jog. And as we're speaking about parking, we will lose 8 city parking spaces. No private businesses will lose spaces on their land, but the city will lose 8 public spaces. We did look at trying to restripe and reorganize the parking in that block, even if we erased the property lines to try to get a more efficient layout. And the problem is with all the buildings and the transformers and the dumpsters and the sidewalks and the light poles, there's not a lot of opportunities to make everything super efficient, and some of the parking is not within city code right now, so if we restriped it, we'd have to bring it to city code and we'd actually lose spaces. One of the concerns the AAB brought up was shadows, and they were worried that the park always seemed kind of dark. So I did go out there and take a couple of pictures. And yes, it does seem dark in that park, but that's because all of the trees are planted along the entire frontage along Broad Street. They're not like to the east or to the west, they're across the whole site in the front, so it creates a shadow there with those gigantic trees. But if there's no trees, this was about 11 o'clock, the shadows aren't coming from the buildings. This is the Unity Club building to the east, so as the sun comes up over the building, it does create a shadow, but if there's no trees, there's a decent amount of sun. And then the picture to the right is 1 o'clock, and there's really no shadows from the building. So the way let me just go, and then 4 o'clock, it'll be in full shade because the sun is to the west and it's shining on the trees that's casting the shadows. If we look back at the plan, we've really moved all of our trees mostly to the west side of the site. So as the sun comes up over the east, there'll be morning sun. And then around noontime, when the shadows will be cast to the north, there'll be part shade and part sun. And then in the late afternoon, the park will be in shade, but that's when you want it to be in shade when it's the heat of the day, the end of the afternoon. So it has morning sun and afternoon shade, and that's really what we want. I think that's ideal. As I mentioned, I plan to resubmit the site plan in October and hopefully get approval in November for the site plan to move on to construction. Now, if there's questions?
Thank you. I just have a real quick question about the Unity Club. Have they weighed in on this wall? Not that they have a say, but I'm curious if they have commented on that wall.
Well, we had a meeting, the EDA hosted a meeting in July where we invited all the boards and commissions and the property owners and business owners, and there were people there from the Unity Club, and they didn't have any concerns about the design of the actual plaza. Their main concern was parking. But no, they didn't
They weren't bothered by
weigh
the
in.
wall? Okay, all right.
We're giving them 15 feet at the widest part of that. Oops. So we're not really pinching their
Can I follow up with you on
area.
a question about the wall, too?
Go for it.
I also had problems with the wall. One, I guess they don't have a problem with, but I really felt like we're walling them off from this.
Sure.
Do we still have at one point, there was some kind of barrier along the back between the park and the parking lot? So that if they want to go in the park, if my understanding is they have to go down and all the way across to get to that other entrance?
Well, they would enter the park just like everybody else enters the park through the entrance to the north or the entrance along Broad Street.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is why we walled them off and gave up a big piece of the park where we could just have a small sidewalk across near the building.
Right, well, one is that it's not their entrance. I mean, it's city property, right? And I guess
Right.
we were just trying to make it our plaza not be the entryway to their building.
Well,
And we were trying to discourage, another thing was to hopefully discourage smoking in the park by giving them a place to smoke that's not in the park.
Okay, well, I think the smoke will just drift into the park if they smoke there anyway, but, okay, that's fine then.
And creating a wall there, on the other side, there'll be a chalk wall, and that creates, just a way for something for kids to do, something for people to do, creates a level of interest there.
So what's the maintenance plan for that chalk wall? Because they fall apart pretty quickly if you don't stay on top of them.
Okay.
They also need to be cleaned frequently. Are we
Okay.
providing the chalk? I mean,
Right.
I've seen them before, us inside businesses and outside, and it seems like pretty quickly there's no chalk and there's just a bunch of smudges.
Okay, yeah. It would be something that I'd have to work with
Right.
Park and Recs on they'd have to commit to
Who's gonna-
maintaining
yeah.
it and changing the message on the wall and changing, what the function of it is. That was the thought, is that we would change it up on a regular basis, change the question, maybe put a stencil up there that people could color
I mean, you worry
in or-
about, like, I hate to say it, but you worry about graffiti, you worry about profanity.
Sure.
People.
Well, this is
people-
a community. You'd hope that if an adult sees something that
Well,
they
but
don't
you
like,
know,
they're gonna.
teenagers or being teenagers or whoever might, feel like being silly, you put
Sure.
up a chalkboard and say, write something. I just hate,
Are we gonna have a
Fortunately-
container for chalk, or is it just gonna be out there in the weather? And I don't carry erasers with me, but,
Right.
I'm just saying, I just
Right.
think that when you do these kind of things, that has Park and Recs, have they signed off to saying they will maintain this wall?
Right, right. Well, I mean, the director of Parks and Rec has been in on these
Right.
design meetings, but yes.
You
and
need to specifically say, someone's gonna need to check up on this wall probably
Sure.
weekly.
Okay.
or even more frequently than that. I just worry about, I hate to say it, but you just worry obscenities or other things, wind up on the wall and then someone walks by with kids and I don't know, who knows? Maybe I'm overthinking it, but
I don't
you-
think-
you give people chalk and a board, you never know what you're going to see. Political statements, various people want to express themselves. Is that what we're trying to do? Is provide some place for people to express their feeling that day or what? I just don't know if that's something we want to open up that box. And then,
Really
and then,
talking about kind of a public forum.
well, then does the city decide, I'm probably overthinking it, but then does the city decide what comments to erase? And how do they decide that?
Yeah.
How do they decide? Then someone complains, the city erased my comment. Why do they do that? I was expressing myself, but they didn't erase this other person's comment. Are they censoring me? You're taking free speech and government and throwing it together on a chalkboard. It seems innocuous, but there's the potential for it to be like a Pandora's box. So I would caution to take a look at that, see if other communities have used something similar and if they've had any experience with it.
Charlottesville has one that's pretty successful.
I've seen the Charlottesville one, and it has have some interesting things on it.
Right.
But I think a lot of students like to write pro, whatever they are pro things. I would suggest, I think we'd be better off with a mural and having like every now and then, the Parks and Rec likes to have like a event in their parks, like a
Right.
2-hour, and maybe come in with chalk and let them chalk something, but like the sidewalk or something. But
Right.
I don't think I just think it's hard to maintain on a permanent basis. I just say this as, there's a lot of things in the city to maintain, and I'm not sure Parks and Rec needs one more thing.
Mr. Snyder mentioned earlier in the evening that we had a staff trip to Frederick, Maryland, and they had chalk walls there, as well as a podium on a stage where you could just literally speak
Right.
whatever you wanted to say, and again, the chalk with whatever you wanted to write.
Bill said some beautiful murals.
Yeah, Ms. Hungemeyer?
I just happen to have a thought, you know, first of all, I'm thinking chalk wall, awesome. But what happens if the chalk goes all on the pavers and all on the stone? That can be difficult to handle.
Have to wash that, rinse that
Yeah,
off.
so I hadn't thought of that before. That could be a kind of a problem, you know, drawing on the,
Well,
on
the
the-
concrete pavers, they could be rinsed off, but you're like, it's another
yeah,
thing to
yeah.
maintain.
But it's another upkeep from the Parks and Rec. I was going to mention public art. Is there going to be any possibility even on that wall, as Melissa just said, for some sort of public art? Or
I mean, we could provide an area for public art, but we don't really have it in the budget to pay for public art out of the EDA's budget.
But have you brought this to the Humanities Council?
No, well, they were invited to the July meeting, but no, I haven't gone directly to them.
July meeting, which
The
one?
July EDA meeting where we invited all of the
yeah.
boards and commissions.
Yeah, but, you know, I certainly can follow up on it with the,
Okay.
you know, with that group. And a couple other things, checkerboards for the tables.
Oh, yes, the
I
tables
asked-
up near the top where
All
these
of
two
them.
tops were going to be game tables.
Because up in, over in Maryland, that park over there with the, where the new big gambling place is, whatever. National Harbor. Yeah, and they're at use all the time. It's really neat looking. And then I was wondering, are you going to use the green bicycle racks or?
Yes,
I mean, we might as well, since that seems to be something we're putting out there,
Yep.
might as well follow through on it.
That's what's planned for the north of the site, the 2 bike racks that I had up here to kind of separate the parking area from the entrance.
Is there any bike rack on the West Broad side, or there's going to be signage to say there's bike racks back there? Because,
We could put a bike rack, you know, right in front of this, you know, planter wall if we wanted a bike rack along Broad Street. I mean, there's certainly enough room there.
yeah, by
One at
by Brown's
Brown's, that's a
Hardware,
little
for
bit too
sure.
far away.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope people bike to this park. That would just, I mean, maybe 2 bike racks is sufficient, but,
If the driveway were closed, there'd be room there as well, you know,
Right,
and that sidewalk,
yes.
where
that's a
there
good-
presently is nothing. So,
yeah, I mean, I've been seeing
One on
these,
the front, one on
I've
the
been
back,
seeing these
whatever.
bike racks being used, you know, more and more. And if we're bringing in capital bike share, maybe this could change the tide here a little bit in the city. So I'd be curious about that. But anyway,
Okay, I can,
anything else
I have more stuff if no one else does.
about the chalk wall, I hope?
No,
No? Okay.
no, I don't want to talk about chalk wall anymore. That was just a maintenance
Kidding, I'm
issue.
kidding.
Okay. No, I want to talk about the plants.
okay.
I don't know if these plants are your final choices, but I help run the habitat restoration team for the city, so we pull invasives out of our parks and put natives back.
Right.
Pretty much all the ornamental grasses and perennials are Asian.
Okay.
We currently try to get most of these out of our parks.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
think the Urban Forester has reviewed, and she had some comments on their plant selection, so
Really?
yeah.
Well, let me just say, like, basically, the shrubs are fine, But the ornamental grasses and perennials in 4 out of 5 of the trees are not natives, and it would be preferable not to have them.
Okay.
We have plenty, like you have a maple in here, but we have lots of maples that are actually native.
Okay.
It'd be nice to have a native one.
Native maple. Right.
Yeah, the ginkgo is not native, the honey locust is not native. The crepe myrtle's not native, but people do plant them around here a lot. It's kind of a southern thing, but it's really from Asia. And they do spread because they
Right.
have berries.
The
Yeah.
I think the important, or the trees that I'd like to keep as they've specified are the honey locust, the ones because they have a higher canopy and they don't drop a lot of junk that needs to be kept. And it seems like that's the type of tree where sunlight could filter through a little bit more. They're a good urban plaza tree, I believe.
I understand it, but honey locust will spread. So I just suggest maybe talk to our arborist and also our landscape team that works on the habitat restoration,
Okay.
Jeremy Edwards and them, and just ask them. A lot of times there are some natives that are quite comparable
Okay.
in the way they do it, and I think there are locusts that are more native. I don't know if and I think they do have that same type of high canopy. But this is just something I'd like you to talk with our staff about, because it doesn't help us to put things in that we have to pull out in
Sure. No,
the parks.
absolutely. Yeah.
One thing with honey locusts, just having some experience with them in streetscape and parks, is it's really helpful if you can get a seedless variety.
Right.
And so these are kind of clones that have been developed for urban situations where they don't have the long seed pods and they don't have the thorns, because the native
Yeah,
ones
if
have
it's
all those
seedless,
things
I
which
don't
are
have a
really
problem with
not very compatible with people being close to them. So,
Right.
it's a little bit of a balancing act.
No, I totally get that. I looked at it and I thought, this is probably not the best selection.
Sure. Sure. Okay.
But I also understand that you're trying to find things that fit what you need. And, but our arborist and our landscape crew have a lot of,
Oh, yeah. I'll work with Kate to make sure we're getting the right,
Experience yeah.
the right plants.
okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right, I think you can summarize our comments by we're not for the chalk wall.
And change out the plants.
Melissa doesn't have to pull out of the parks.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Melissa's been pulling out for. Is poison ivy native? 9 years. Yes, it is. And it actually has high wildlife value. The berries have a fat content that's really helpful to birds migrating north.
I will be back in 30 seconds.
Tell the naming rights.
We were just FYI, we were just talking about, public art was mentioned. I mentioned whether we might be able to explore, some places you do outdoor art hanging, so you had art that was durable for the outside. Perhaps shows could be done with, where the timber wall could be used, have those displays.
I think that's a great thought, because both the high school and Falls Church Arts might find that really interesting. They do different kinds of art shows all the time.
Would give you
Yeah.
change with, but it would not be one thing forever, you know.
Yeah, because when my son was doing the IB art program at George Mason, they did a lot of art with metal, which is something you could do outside like that, yeah.
Okay, we are on to our second and final work session topic. Small area plan update.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, We are making progress on the small area plan, but I don't have a draft full plan for you to look at right at this moment. I did want to have her give you an update on where we are, particularly kind of try to focus on a couple of things, in particular, the refinement and thinking about the future land use and zoning for the property, and also to share with you revised draft concept maps that have evolved since the last meeting we had. We had meetings in February, and then in March, and then in June. And of course, the commission's been involved in all of those. So wanted to share those with you, and also to distribute to you copies of the community school site plan, which is the school plan that seems to have evolved and is now choice of the school board and the school community as to their preferred plan and how that could relate to the balance of the property. Also, we have included in the package, and we would ask you to save these materials, we've now gotten final reports from the consultants who have been doing work for us. One is the urban design guidelines that have been put together by Roadside and Harwell. This was a group that was funded through a grant through the state of Virginia. So they've done a lot of work in looking at ideas, examples from elsewhere, and developed some ideas for guidelines for streets, arrangement of buildings, a lot of really great pictures of other places that are helpful for us as we think about placemaking. The Nelson Nygaard group, which COG grant, and they've done mobility and accessibility planning work, and so this report is with you. Then we have the Commercial Development Strategic Roadmap. This is the report done by Alvarez and Marcel that I think has been discussion of that and key work that was to go forward at the last Economic Working Group. And then, in addition, we've got a draft plan, I believe, that, or draft memo that's been done looking at sustainability, the geothermal feasibility study, and it's a brief report. It's not final yet, but gives you an idea of some of the possibilities for geothermal district energy and its feasibility and its payback. These reports ultimately will be referenced and an appendix, if you will, to the final small area plan, but our thought is that we would try to synthesize the best from them and produce a smaller scale chapter that would put in the small area plan. So, for example, the mobility plan, we're working on taking that Nelson Nygaard report and turning it into a condensed, smaller version as a chapter in the plan. Don't have that for you, but that's our intent, is to, these all need to be reduced down to their essence, if you will. But I do think best use of our time tonight would be to talk about areas that the Planning Commission by state statute obliged to be involved in, and that is zoning. In some of our earlier presentations, we had 3 or 4 different options about how this might be developed. And now that the area for economic development has been more or less finalized as to where that might be, we're suggesting that a future land use plan might look something like this. In this, attached to the memo, this is the cover memo from me, and this would be combination of public here, public on the 70% that is school and education. It's the smallest group of papers that you've got. Should have it.
Lindy, did you get 2 again?
So there's a future land use map. and there is a zoning map. So one of the things to remember is sometime back when we were looking at the proper legislation in Virginia, and as a part of our efforts to put the city in the best position, City Council and the Planning Commission approved revitalization areas for the commercial areas of the city. 3 of them. One was West Broad, second one was Washington Street, and the third one was the East End city. And so the dashed line in this map shows the boundaries of that portion of West Broad Street revitalization area that was approved on the comprehensive plan. That includes the new property yard area, includes the area that we got through the boundary adjustment that has the middle school and the high school, and it surrounds the commercial areas of the city. Map were extended, would go all the way to downtown. On this map also, we're showing the 2 school symbols. This area has been in Fairfax County. Presently, it has no plan. So one of the things that needs to happen here is putting these 2 school signals, or symbols rather, on the property, recognizing that we have high school and a middle school here and what those might be. We need to do a 2232 review to say that the rebuilding of the high school and the middle school, if those are approved by the voters, is. So this symbol of mixed use for the approximately 30% of the property, and green representing the schools, play fields, I think would represent the uses. We have a red boundary around all of that, suggesting that it would be designated as a special revitalization district for education and economic development, recognizing that the 2 uses coexist, support one another, and be designed in a complementary fashion. On the zoning side, we've talked a lot about what area might be zoned. It's our feeling that of the tools we have, the B2 zone is the most useful and provides the most flexibility while also providing necessary control, because any residential uses require a special exception and earned by having a significant commercial activity on it. They also permit additional height. This school, if it is, voters approve it, would be more than present low-rise school. And R1A zoning, has height limits that wouldn't really. Also, a single zone, B2 does allow public buildings and facilities, so schools are permitted. Doesn't limit you with buffers and other kinds of requirements between. So ultimately, the plan for the school happened on the area and then the other area. So these are a couple of thoughts as to what land use and zoning patterns look like on the property. We also are developing some draft language that might provide some special rules for areas like this, more flexibility for the council, for height, parking, setting some expectations about. So we've been working, I've got some draft language on that, which we won't go into. If I wanted to talk to you all about the land use. And also, we have in here the conceptual plan, which shows the community school combined with a variety of ways to develop the commercial area, but which would include a promenade or a greenway connecting the practice field of the community school. Some of you may have been at the tailgate party that was, a tailgate event that was held up at the high school, advance of, I guess it was last week's football game, from about 5 to 7:30. It was very well attended. I had not been to one previously, but I was there at that one. Very well attended, lots of activity, a lot of energy, and it was on almost a leftover piece of ground, which was well hidden from the rest of Falls Church by parking, buildings, et cetera. Nonetheless, the amount of energy, community activity, et cetera, that was going on was very impressive. So one of the things that we've been thinking about with this community school, could this practice field area become more of a gathering space where, in addition to having practice field school day, you might be able to have a turf field and have this be a place where more community events happen.
You know, we
Very
do,
visible.
but you know, we do the fireworks there as well. And so we are already doing some community events.
So one of the benefits of this kind of a scheme has been, because there had been concern of, gee, what will a commercial development and practice field, how will these join? Is that properly designed, could be a really great civic gathering place that has multiple functions. And so the notion of having kind of a greenway that connects the commercial area to it and the rest of the city is in this concept. So love to get I've talked enough, but love to get your thoughts and reactions to some of these things we're sharing with you tonight.
Off the top of my head, you know, I know you saw that as open space, and I guess you finally realized it's a practice field
Yes.
up there, but they also, as Melissa was saying, they shoot off all the fireworks from there because they can't do it down on the turf field. It used to be vice versa. But I thought that this layout was very interesting. The only thing is we're really doing the practice field right down into the commercial area, which, you know, I think it'd be a good barrier. Of course,
Well, there's a lot of soccer fields that are right on commercial areas, like some of them in Arlington are right up against Bowen and a bunch of
Right.
buildings. They're between Bowen and a railroad line. So it's, you know, you put
you
them
know,
where you
you'd
can.
have to have hours and everything, and for the tennis courts and stuff like that. You know, just, it gets complicated about use, but, you know, I think everything should be used.
So the part that I want to talk about is the zoning. I have heard this B2 zoning for quite a while. I'm fairly convinced it's the right one, but I'm not sure I understand the pros and cons, and I have heard that there's some, concern about by right.
Right.
That we would be giving some by right privilege by zoning a B2. It's not my understanding, but I just want to have that part of the discussion, because
What if I give you my interpretation of Mike Novotny's stance, and then Jim can respond? I
wasn't there, that's
actually-
like I said,
Yeah, I don't actually necessarily, I'm not necessarily worried about what Mike was saying, but I think I understood. So Mike's point is, right now, it's not zoned, so the default zoning is R1A or something like that. R1A. Right, and so Mike's point was, if you proactively zone this to B2, and then enter into an agreement with some developer that could potentially be disputed or modified, then that developer gets, this is his specific example, that developer gets like a GSA type government use on this land, builds by right office buildings with surface lots, and then the GSA buys it, because that's usually a requirement they have, and then it comes off the tax rolls. And so it's like this horrible development and doesn't even generate taxes. Now, it seemed far-fetched to me, mostly just because, like, we own the land, and I would assume we would craft some agreement that would prevent such an outcome regardless of the zoning. I don't know if Mike had some specific thought about how that could get complicated. And then speaking for Jim, I think Jim's point is, well, and the other thing I think Mike was trying to say is, like, generally speaking, in other parts of the city, we use the rezoning as one of the negotiating points to try to get concessions, I think, from a developer. But again, in this case, it seems different because clearly we are going to give rezoning to any developer. We don't want single-family homes there. So it seems like a false leverage, like, negotiating point. Like, any developer knows we're going to rezone this. And I think Jim's point is, if we rezone it now, it's basically getting the process a little bit farther down. Clearly, if it's mixed use, it's going to have to go through a special exception anyway, as we all know, a whole process there. So I find the risk of rezoning to B2 right now to be fairly limited. I pointed out to Mike, if we actually are worried about some by right development and some weird, complicated, confusing legal battle over some agreement with some purchaser, should we also not think about what that could be if it remains R1A? So like, to me,
Yeah, but we can put restrictive covenants or something in the land.
I just think since
because
we
that's
own
what
it, yeah.
Fairfax City did. I don't know who of you were on the tour for Fairfax City a few years ago.
I was.
They bought up land, resold it to developers, but they put restrictive covenants in it about what could actually be built.
yeah,
So they limit it to what
yeah,
they
so
wanted.
we, I think Mike was just trying to think it through, and I'm not an expert on these things, but it seemed far-fetched, the risk of rezoning it. I would say it would be a completely different story if we didn't own the land, because then absolutely some landowner could go and do some by right B2 thing that we don't want. But because we own the land, and I think we would do covenants or whatever we would do when we enter into some agreement with the developer, that his potential outcome seems unlikely. Partially because it seems like the risk would be similar if you leave it R1A, in my mind.
Jim, was there any thought to creating, I mean, a new zone? I mean, this part of the city is so, well, not only is it new, but it's so different. Is the B2 zone, provide the tools to the fine-grained kind of design that we're looking for here? Even, I know with this, I guess you were envisioning perhaps like the special exception, options would be utilized here potentially. Was there thought to creating a new zone specifically for this area?
There has been talk about it. One of the difficulties is we don't have a year to, timing, in other words, using tools you have. But one of the thoughts behind, and I'll just share this with you. Special revitalization
On Route
district
7?
on the land use.
It's not going to happen.
Could we create
plague kid.
something within B2 that would let us do some conceptual planning for the area
It's
in
funny-
areas so designated on the land use plan, and do a conceptual phased development plan that would say, here's what we'd like to have, and that could be approved up front as our aspirational ideas for the site. Pending or additional final plans for each individual.
So it's funny because I was going to ask you, I know we have like the official design area, and we have overlays. I was going to ask if we could do a special overlay, not a new,
Well-
maybe we can't do a new,
And
you
that's
know,
really
zoning
what this,
district, but-
that's what the special
Yeah.
revitalization district and the land use plan is all about.
Comes like an overlay.
In a sense,
Okay.
it says, we're putting a line around this area, it's special, here are the things we're trying to achieve, education, economic development, and then as a part of such a thing, for example, in Arlington, there are a number of these that have been done in special areas, and there are half a dozen items that they're trying to achieve, world-class high school, 1,500 kids, economic development that's transit-oriented development, mix of uses at a certain ratio. You can identify, as a part of your land use plan, through a note on the plan, your goals for this revitalization area that are aspirational. They're not code in terms of zoning, but they are, here's what we'd like to achieve. The Pentagon City area, for example, which was a blank field before they put a metro station in it, there was a program created as a part of the special planning for that area. Still being worked on 30 years later, but here's how much residential, here they wanted a regional shopping center, a certain amount of office, a certain amount of retail, and so having a general idea of what you'd like to have there and creating a subset of B2 that would give more flexibility for height, more flexibility for parking. Ultimately, as Mr. Rankin mentioned, the city and the schools own the property, so you would have a lot to say about what you want to have. I think it is important, though, to be able for people who, if you want to get top dollar for it, for them to know that it's not going to be zoned single family. Here's what we're aspiring to get on the property, and when it goes out for the RFP, you'll find out from the marketplace what the marketplace is willing to do, but you signal as part of this planning process, and the planning should come before the zoning, that here's what we'd like to achieve here. Recognizing that you need to stay flexible because trying to prescribe exactly what's going to happen. Saying it can't be any different than that usually doesn't work, but that's kind of the idea here. So this is a really beginning draft of how we might write a subsection of B2, area on the plan that's so designated to provide additional flexibility. So maybe 1 or 2 taller buildings, or more flexibility on parking, certain amount of mix of use.
I'm trying to do the math. What's the FAR? You have a density of 1 million on what, 8 acres? What's the site?
Well, it's about, it's ranging from 10.4 to 9.7, depending on how much is left after,
Yeah.
The school needs its program, so the residual, but it's probably, depending on how much density is there, it would not be more than 3.5 on the portion that it's on, which is a reasonable density, not an excessive amount of density for a transit-oriented place.
So if-
When you spread it over the whole site, it's
Right.
it's a very modest amount of density. And that's part of the balancing act here is we need a high school, we need green space, we need a middle school, we need a lot of this space to do a good job with that. Hoping the commercial area can be additive and complementary to that effort.
So, just one second. So,
Yeah, sure.
I want to just go back to Mr. Rankin's resuscitation of the downside risk here, because I'm not sure I understood it. Do you see this risk? I mean, were you at the economic working group?
Yes, I
So,
was.
do you understand what because I don't. I want to make sure I get this downside risk, because I'm not hearing
I
it.
think it's good that Mr. Novotny brought it up. I think it's the kind of thing we should be able to protect ourselves from. The proper language, the legislation at the state level really tells you you're better off to have the rezoning in place, because I think the way it's written is if it's part of a rezoning, you can't ask for. So some of the things we've done, creating a special revitalization area, also we have it zoned up front, I think it puts it in a stronger position to support our
Well, mixed use, once you get something that's non-residential in the mix, it typically then the proper bill doesn't always apply.
Yeah, I think
I think we're actually
Mike's,
better off if we do zone it, but it's a good point to note.
I think his ultimate
You
point is.
protect yourself.
Right, his ultimate point
Think
is,
about that.
if you rezone it and then somehow lose control of it, then there are by right paths that could go down,
Right.
which I said, sure, same thing if it's R1A.
I mean, in
we lose
B2, what's
control
the
of it.
max FAR in B2 now?
There isn't an FAR
There isn't, right?
limitation. You can't do residential
Height,
of it
yeah.
without
Can't do it?
special
Right.
exception. So
There's a height limit though, right?
there is a 75-foot height limit presently.
The Alvarez,
Setbacks.
Like setbacks, yeah.
Yeah, setbacks and
Parking.
parking.
the Alvarez report on
We
page,
haven't had a lot of by right B2 development.
No, we have not, right.
the Alvarez,
Oh, not a lot. Please let me build a 7-story office building by right.
Well, we've had some come in, but then they didn't do it.
Well, and what we've heard from
We've
all,
had two.
what we've heard from all the, honestly, the folks who read the market is that anyone who comes in here, residential is going to be part of the mix. So I mean, it'd be hard to see a by right project happen here under B2.
well, I was just going to address that.
It'd be hard to see
The
that.
Alvarez report on page 9 at the top gives what looks to me a pretty expansive list of things, if they're right, a pretty expansive list of things that could be done by right on B2.
Oh, by right, yeah.
Where are we here?
Project's going to have residential in some form, and so.
Page 9, you said?
Otherwise, it's not going to
Yes,
happen.
the very top.
Well, and some of these, we'd love if someone came in and built a giant hotel. But they were
Oh, they
gonna get
will.
it. With a ballroom.
One of the real concerns has been in this whole process is, as I've heard it, and those of you who've attended these meetings can, agree or not agree, that the marketplace wants to build a lot of residential. And so the challenge is, how much commercial can we require of people who want to build residential? This little ordinance draft suggests a 60-40 split. Whether we can achieve that or not, I don't know. That's I think, thought to be aggressive. I think 30% is considered, if we get that, that would be good. So, but I think it's, what I've heard the community want and city needing is, a very healthy amount of commercial space. And if there is residential space, it needs to be smaller units and oriented to transit, not large units and not condominium. So this is, I do think when you own the property and you control the planning and the zoning, you should be able to craft rules and legal documents that protect you. So I think Mr. Novotny's point's good to know about. We need to make sure that there's not a loophole like that could be exercised, but I think owning the property and being in control of all the mechanisms,
Yeah.
we certainly can protect ourselves.
I mean, to me, it comes down to that risk that somehow you rezone it and then lose control over it versus the benefit of zoning it ahead of time, and does that encourage developers? And that's beyond
Well,
my
and
experience.
honestly, that's the way in a lot of parts of, the world, or even in the United States outside of Virginia. I mean, it's very common that in Maryland, they zone it first, and a lot of development happens by right. You have very prescriptive zoning that spells out exactly what you want to see, and then folks come in and build according to that. In fact, developers prefer the certainty sometimes more than the uncertainty of going through a proffer negotiation process, but, I mean,
That's what we've heard. That's
so
what we've
there's
heard.
some benefit to that, in theory.
Right,
mean,
and of course, they
assuming
wouldn't
you
be
can get-
getting that here, but are they
Right.
getting something? I mean, from what I hear what Jim says, it sounds like the idea is, hey, we want something to happen sooner than later. If we go ahead and zone it, first of all, we have to do some zoning because the school can't, we
Yeah.
got to put the school symbols on there. So we got to do something. So if we're going to go ahead and zone it, if we do this, does that just take one step out of some future development process? Does that help a developer?
It seems to me like if we zone it B2, we have the ability to put covenants in any kind of land sale. We can do this special revitalization district overlay. And we're also limited to by our deal with Fairfax County. There's only so much that can be commercial that kind of stops it. I think those tools give us the ability to know what's going to happen or to stop something from happening or whatever. I think.
Yeah.
I can, there's a lot of weird things that can happen, but I think if we have these tools, I don't think we're
Right,
gonna
I think
have
that-
something.
yeah.
So one
Go
thought, one
wrong.
question, I guess, is, we had kind of general patterns before. There were stripes with, a variety of things. We didn't know where it was going to be. So this is trying to, in very simple terms, show where the mixed-use development might be and where the commercial area might be, so that, it's more evident to the public as to what would actually happen. So, your thoughts on that would be appreciated. There also is a need for some property exchanges. I think the city owns the football field
Yeah, we got to
and
do
the
some
school zone
subdivision.
down to
there.
Haycock, and so figuring out the parcels, subdividing, so that there's a parcel for the school park development and parcel for development those are things that would have to get done. Easements may have to be vacated. Those are things that would come before the planning commission.
And Jim,
You can't convey rights to a parcel that's not.
So what's our order of business? Is it to do the zoning and the special revitalization district at the same time, I assume? Then deal with the subdivision and the easements, or
Well, I
how are we
think
doing it?
The land use planning portion, should come first,
Right.
the comprehensive plan portion. And that, of course, requires notice to our neighbors for any comprehensive plan notice. So it'll be looked at by Fairfax County as well to make sure that, one of the key principles here is this is implementing the agreement that was created between the two groups as a part of the boundary adjustment certified by the state, and there's a whole list of things about that. So I think that should come first. You certainly could, the zoning and subdivision could come after that. Could all be done at one time, but it doesn't have to. But it does seem to me that if you've taken care of, the parcel exchanges and the subdivision, and you zone it, and then you're in a better position to convey firm and detailed rights that you want to sell or lease. And if your people need, it's better to have it in place so that you can demonstrate to the people buying it that it's really there, as opposed to, trust us, it's going to happen.
Right.
It's,
So what's holding
you
us
aren't going
back?
to you aren't going to get the dollars you want in the timing you want, I don't think, unless you've made some positive actions on the land use.
That's what worries me, is the timing. I was just thinking,
Is that
With
answer your
the-
question,
with the-
Christine?
No, it does. I think that it's, the land use and the zoning is pretty straightforward. I mean, this is aligned with everything we're gonna do, and so I'm like, when are we gonna move forward? Because I don't think we have disagreement that this is
well,
what it has to
gotta
be.
wait till after the
and this,
referendum.
however,
Well,
That's the
referendum or not,
timeline.
we still have to zone this property.
Yeah,
and-
I think we might zone it
and
differently.
this is what I was thinking about,
We can zone
November
it the way we
7th.
want it to be.
Is the day of the day. And you know, what's our timeline to put this together after? Or should we be putting something, we got a couple of October dates? Should we be looking at stuff beforehand? Because this worries me that something we might not do is going to hold up stuff.
Well, in looking at timing, if you look to,
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah, we're looking, I think, by the end of the year, early 2008.
Does that give us time to notify,
To work on the small
people?
area plan.
to notify everybody around and everything?
We should be able to, but it's first quarter, I think, of 2018.
Agenda's light on
The
October
land use plan
2nd.
would happen. I'm sorry.
But
Really wants to meet on October 2nd.
But I'm
If I got the
concerned,
wrong date.
I'm concerned about that, you know, if we don't have our ducks in a row, that people who are interested in developing, you know, coming in right away, we won't be ready for them. One other thing, who developed this, is it, the one with the layout?
This was developed by staff.
Okay, big question.
Yeah.
Does it meet all the VA regulations of acreage and size for the two schools and all the athletic places?
This is a sketch drawing, it's not an engineered plan, but yes, this does show the size of the school and the remaining area.
But, you know, all
We do
the,
need to have a survey done, I think Public
yeah, the
Works has worked
VA,
on it.
you know, the.
Oh, you mean,
what was I
I'm
gonna
sorry,
say?
you mean the state of Virginia
Yeah,
requirements?
state of, for sizes of schools and what kind of acreage you need. I mean, that would be a very definite thing you got to knock down or pin down.
I think that is an issue, I believe, for the school board, and there are, I don't know the exact acreage required, but typically in these urban areas,
Okay, but
schools are going
gotta
to
keep
be
that in
less
mind,
than the
'cause that-
state standard.
that
Yeah.
comes into
I think we
play with-
probably are now, presently. to be-
with TJ, and it came into play with a lot of other acreage that we were looking for to perhaps put a school on and things, and there just wasn't enough room, and people just couldn't understand it. And so I just, you know, just wanted to make sure that this would be, you know, a lovely sketch, but, you know, because it fits nicely with all the roads going between the football field and UVA, et cetera.
And we're, you know, this is trying to show what the 9.7 to 10.4 acres, you know, what remains after the school gets what it,
But this didn't come
Needs.
from the architect.
well, this is, we've taken the architectural plans from the school feasibility study
Okay,
and put this on here and then use the
Okay.
remainder to sketch out what it might be. Now, again, this could change dramatically. We were trying to suggest a way to have open space and connectivity between, you know, the school site and
Right.
the development so that there would be a safe, good connection between the school site
sure
and the rest
somebody
of
will
the
check
city.
that out.
Um,
Looks pretty.
We do think that, you know, depending on the design of the practice field area, if you go to university campuses or even look at it in Arlington, the W&L High School along Washington Boulevard, that, you know, fencing and architectural elements along the edge of a campus can help define it, but also be inviting so that you get shared use of green space for a broader community use. I think actually, particularly after watching the tailgate event, I think this could be a wonderful gathering place that serves everyday school function and broader community use so that we get the most collective use out of it.
EPE.
So going back to Melissa's question, like how do we progress this forward? It sounds like you're saying it towards the end of the year because of all these notice provisions. I think, you know, what I've heard, and we've sort of said this before, is that the more certainty we can give a developer, that's better. I am of the personal opinion that moving faster on this is better than waiting.
That's what I think, too.
So, I mean, how does this, and I don't know that there seems to be that much controversy or pushback on B2 at this point. I mean, I heard it from Alvarez and Marcel. I've heard it from you. I've heard it, you know, elsewhere. So how do we move this forward, and how we I mean, I guess that's the
Well, I
question.
guess-
How do we
I guess-
go forward
I guess
quickly?
the answer to that will be, one, this is a further refinement of earlier things we've talked about for several years.
Yeah?
We need to wait and find out what the voters think in terms of the referendum.
But do we? I mean,
Well,
we
I
have
think
we have two schools on there already, so you could zone it B2 because of its current
I
use.
think it would make sense for us to wait for that to happen, and then be prepared to go forward with the land use planning and the comprehensive planning effort, because you'd need to do that if you were to go forward with school construction. 2232 review, put these things on the map, et cetera.
But Jim, what
Yeah.
Russ, I think, I hear him saying what I heard, I said also, couldn't we have that all set to go?
Well, I think we can be ready for it, absolutely. We can
Because I don't
have
think
staff reports.
starting after
sketched
the
out and-
referendum is a,
Yeah.
Well, and I have a
That's why we're
feeling,
talking to you now, is to be ready for, depending on what happens, being able to move forward. So this is, again, we're working on the draft plan. Probably have a check-in with this group between now and the end of the year with detail of the draft plan. And so, hope to finish it by the end of the year or early 2018. Probably not, it wouldn't be finalized until you'd actually done the land use, so that could be incorporated into an approved final plan.
I would think too that the land use could possibly change if the referendum didn't go through, but the zoning won't change. Regardless, we have to zone that area, and that's probably what we would zone it. But,
Well, we need a land use plan designation because,
I know.
yeah, so
I mean, I'm just saying, I even think the land use is probably gonna be the same regardless, but, because whatever happens, if it doesn't go through, we're just gonna have to come up with a new plan that's very similar probably to what we have.
Mr. Krasner asked about, could there be a new category? That takes a lot of time. We'll probably have to have a multitude of task forces. And so one of the questions is, do we have suitable tools now? Can we refine those? Yeah, can they be tweaked?
Yeah, I agree. I think the tweaks to the B2, I think the B2 as it stands is probably too blunt an instrument, but I think with the additional things that you're proposing and, working like that as whether creating like a de facto overlay, as it were, yeah, I think that's the way to go. Yeah, I agree with that.
Jim, one of the things that came up last Friday was the potential for allowing a developer to start on the land closest to Haycock before there's a new school or anything. Is there anything we could do in this area plan to accommodate for that, or is that sort of a separate?
I think that's, I think some of that would depend on whether or not there's any ability. One of the challenges for the schools will be, for any project, is there's going to be a certain need for some phasing,
Yeah.
space for phasing.
Right,
and
it seemed
so,
contingent on getting
I think it's
an agreement with next door.
possibly being able to make some arrangement with Fairfax County and with UVA Tech to use that parking area, which was very full, but now is very empty.
Right.
So could we make productive use of that? I think it's something we'd have to be explored in more detail, but I'd say there's a potential, certainly not a 90% potential, but
Sure.
maybe a 50-50 potential. And it would depend on whether someone wanting to develop the property
Sure.
would have any interest in doing something in a phased, approach.
Right. Well, I think honestly, it would only be possible if they got a deal to use the Virginia Tech. But even then, you have access challenges, so you'd have to get creative. I mean, Dr. Noonan was sort of like, yeah, we would be up for trying if we could figure it out, but it would be awfully tight. I mean, you'd be
Yeah,
up close to school operations.
I just
Sort of
want to have the roadmap in place because it seems like in a couple of other situations, we haven't had the full area plan and everything, and then we've had the development come in, and we're saying, oh, okay, how do we fit this and that? And that bothers me. And so I know I am a very impatient person.
Well, that's a good question because I think, and I've felt the same way, like most of our area plans were sort of
We're backwards.
we're filling in the gaps as the development
Yeah,
is coming
yeah.
together. But in this case, since we're going to be the ones on both ends of it, I've wondered about that. Like, how much are we going to plan ahead of engaging with a potential developer? You know what I mean? Versus have it be a fairly high-level plan in terms of area plan, so that the process of engaging with the developer allows it to come in. I think maybe it depends on if the referendum passes and we start hearing, I think if the referendum passes, we'll probably hear from developers fairly quickly who are particularly interested.
But developers would also like to know what our zoning
Right.
is.
No, I know, and I think that's where I think if that is slow, then maybe this planning gets out in front and encourages developers. Otherwise, I do think it'll be, this area plan will be sort of hand in hand with whatever negotiations we are in with the master developer or whatever. But I don't think we can take any specific action before the referendum, but I'm all for walking up to the line and be waiting to file or do whatever we want to do the next day. If I wouldn't want to wait around and say, well,
Oh, now,
So one of the reasons to bring up the land use and zoning with this group, the pretty essential piece of all this, and also some of these concept ideas. And now we've got pretty much the final reports from the consultants. So we're kind of at a stage where we're now going to take that information, try to synthesize it, put it together in a more detailed draft plan that we can share with you further in the fall before finalizing a draft or having a more final draft. So I would expect we would have
right.
some kind of a work session with you in maybe December sometime, showing you more work that we've done. But I'd love to get your reaction to kind of what we're thinking about at this stage.
Yeah, so
whether
I get
this is headed in the right direction. or
Right,
not.
so I get the sense that, this is like, hey, making a change to the future land use map and zoning is a big deal, and we want to make sure we're thorough about it. But I think it's a bit of an awkward situation because it's like actually pretty basic, and there really aren't that many other options to consider. And so I, for one, in terms of just this work session, am willing to say that this is basically exactly what I think we should do. I struggle thinking of any alternatives that make any sense. So I'm all for plowing ahead with this. Obviously, no, because it's a work session, but if other people have other ideas, I guess what I'm saying is I know, I get the sense you're just like, hey, I don't want to just decide this. And I'm like, this is exactly what I would have drawn. So I do think we need to be careful, and this came up on Friday too, about, Fairfax County seems to be playing nice right now, which is great. And I love Fairfax County. If you're watching, love you. Grew up in Fairfax County. But I do fear getting down a path and then the very particular details of this agreement, this overarching agreement about the 1/3 and all that other stuff and what we can do, throwing a monkey wrench. So jokingly in the meeting, someone mentioned the notion of, essentially suing ourselves to make sure our plans fit within whatever legal rules. I don't think we'd do that, but I think make sure Fairfax County is plugged in, seeing stuff early, giving them every opportunity to complain about it so that we can do something about it. Because the last thing we want to do is be sitting down to sign something with the developer and then have the Fairfax County lawyer walk up and be like, well, hey, hold on a second.
Certainly the intent of the city to abide scrupulously by the
absolutely.
boundary adjustment agreement. And I believe in the details of it, we agreed to there's non-interference kind of
All right.
things about
Right, so if
how
we're,
we will both behave in this.
right, so if we are being very proactive, then they really can't come in and tweak us at the last minute, because we'd be
We want
like,
to be very candid
we'd be like, hey,
and
we've been
transparent,
showing, I mean, they
but,
can't.
abiding by the rules.
As long as we follow the rules of the agreement, I mean, it's our,
Right, so we
it's
gotta
our-
make sure we're
it's our
doing
land.
that.
however,
And
what
our-
if we try to get parking agreements with UVA?
Well, that,
And they'll say, oh, no, you
Well, actually, when we had our stakeholders meeting, that was all approved, I think, because of the need at the time for Metro parking.
overflow
And
parking.
it was a requirement. And I think as a part of the stakeholders meeting we had, there was acknowledgement by Metro and everyone else that we don't have that problem anymore. Use of this for other purposes is something we can talk about. And I think Metro as well was looking at, we have all this unused parking that we'd like to fill up our garage, we'd like to maybe move the ride facility over to the other side of the garage as part of the I-66. That is, I think, going to build the connection between the off-ramp, fly over and connect to down 66 so that people. So there's that's funded by VDOT. Those are very positive things that should help traffic. And so I think some really good things are coming into place here.
Speaking of,
Optimistic.
speaking of VDOT, one of the other early hurdles, as I understand it, is putting in a stoplight on Broad Street. Is there a defined process as to when we would apply for that and when we would hear back?
Well, I don't have we will need to initiate that conversation. Not the expert on that, but that is definitely one of the things that needs to happen is the discussion about how do we get a signalized, have to have that discussion. VDOT was, I believe, at the stakeholders, was put together because we had VDOT, Fairfax County, a whole variety of people, UVA and tech, all there. So it's a very good question, something we need to work on.
Right, depending on our road situation, road grid, entrances, nexus, and everything, absolutely, we need to also look at Haycock.
In terms of the concept plan, one of the notions here was that an area in the center could provide connected open space to the high school, middle school campus, provide a place for utilities to happen, a slower pedestrian and bike-friendly connection so that people going safe way to get to and from school. And it really would be desirable to have a hawk signal at Haycock to get people across Haycock. That's, kind of a further refinement of this.
Hawk signal or hawk signal.
And when we get refined, we're also going to have to talk about drop-off and buses and all that fun stuff.
And I think that what that probably would be is buses would come along the northern edge and rotate around in front of the school. In other words, they would not come to the center of the site, to come along, as they do now, along the road next to UVA Tech and come in front of the school.
Yeah, well, I guess, okay.
So that's a
sense.
school operation issue, but there will need to be further refinement of that. It's a very important piece of it. So in terms of land use and zoning, are we on the right track, do you think? And I
We are
hear
on the
support for
track.
the special revitalization district as an approach with tweaking to B2 as a way to make it more useful and specific for this site, so it's not as such a blunt instrument.
Yeah, I think that's it. I haven't heard anything different.
Thank you for your thoughts and input. Again, this is all very draft. We're just trying to share with you some thinking, but we'll keep you posted, okay?
Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a month.